Hello, everyone. So up next, we have Imran Afzal, and he's going to talk to us about overcoming imposter syndrome. So here we go.
Thank you for the introduction. Hey, everyone. Really pleased to be here, really excited to be doing this session. And I really hope everybody finds something useful in what topic I'm going to cover today. It's a topic that I hold really dear to my heart. It's really important and something that I feel we should be talking about far more than we do in the design and digital and tech space. So to begin with, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Imran. I'm a lead UX designer at Co-op Digital in the UK. I work in the Experience Library team, and the Experience Library is effectively our design system. It's a little bit more than a design system because it isn't just for digital, it's for any experience, whether that's digital, offline, in-store, or anything else. My previous role was UX manager at Otto Group. I managed a team of designers, researchers, and built up the function of UX and user-centered design from the ground up. I've worked in UX for around 15 years and I've done a mixture of in-house and agency roles. And when I studied at higher education and university, I studied human-computer interaction. So to start this session, I'd like to refer to this photograph of me, which was taken shortly before the COVID-19 pandemic. I went into the Huddersfield University, which is where I'd studied in the UK for my degree, and I gave a talk on UX. This talk, this session, and actually going into the university was quite cathartic for me. It was quite the moment because I was going back to a university where I had given numerous presentations and I hadn't enjoyed even a single one of them. For me, presenting while I was at university and studying was just really, really tough. I would get really anxious. I wouldn't enjoy speaking. I'd struggle to explain myself. People would ask me questions and that would make me more nervous. And I just didn't enjoy the process of standing up in front of people and presenting. And there's a particular moment that I remember from university. It was in the final year of my study. I was presenting in front of a group of tutors, lecturers, examiners, and explaining the idea behind my thesis, what I was exploring, and why I chose to go down that particular route. I was already nervous. I wasn't looking forward to the session one bit, and I was just looking forward to that moment of getting the session done and then being able to say it's finished and it's kind of complete. About 10 minutes into the presentation, and I could already feel myself struggling ever so slightly in trying to explain myself and trying to remember the things that I said I was going to say clearly in my head. One of the lecturers interrupted me and he said, "Hold on, Imran. I'm not sure you've fully grasped what we asked you to do with the brief, really. You seem to have gone down a route and I'm not sure this is a good response to what we asked for." And in that moment, my heart sank. I just wanted to disappear into the earth somewhere. I was already feeling nervous. I felt really, really anxious, stood there in front of people, knowing that they were assessing my ability to explain my ideas and rationalize what I was doing and why I was doing it. And I suddenly just felt the strength in my legs go. I felt my heart sort of sink. And I just wanted to get out of that moment. I didn't know how to respond to the question. I seemed to lose my voice. I was very fortunate that the one examiner in the room, she spoke up and said to counter the lecturer that she actually liked the idea that I was exploring. There was slight relief after that moment, but it passed quite quickly. I remember leaving the room feeling just awful that I'd completely, failed at that presentation. I knew inside that my idea behind the thesis was really good, but I just struggled to explain it. And I just hadn't done a very good job of presenting my thinking, my approach, and my struggles with presenting had really kind of come to the forefront in that session. I also felt awful because I thought to myself, I worked really hard on my degree for 4 years, and it feels like this is going to have a significant impact on the outcome of my degree. A couple of months passed by. I remember going to university to get my results, and I actually got really good results that I felt proud of. But I can distinctively remember looking at my results and saying to myself in my head, I think I must have been quite lucky. Perhaps it was because of what the examiner said. Somehow I managed to get away with it. Somehow I'd managed to get away with getting a good grade, a good degree, despite the fact that I'd made a terrible mistake and done a terrible job of actually presenting my ideas at the end of the year when I was in front of the lecturers and tutors. A few years passed by, and I remember working for an organization where I was a designer, and I was asked to go to Germany. I was asked to go to Germany to meet colleagues there and do an exchange of ideas. And a group of 3 or 4 of us went from the UK to Germany. And I still, I was in that space where I still never enjoyed presenting or speaking in front of people. And I was hoping that I wouldn't have to stand in front of a group of people and share any ideas. I was hoping it'd be more conversational. I went abroad, and I remember we met in a particular room, which was at the German office. And we went in, we greeted each other. The usual pleasantries, shake of hands, asking how you are, how your trip was, and things like that. And I remember as I stood there, went and shook hands with a particular person there, and he shook my hand, said hi, and he said to me, "Where are you from?" And initially I thought to myself, he hasn't asked anybody else that question, "Where are you from?" but he's asked me. And my immediate reaction after that was to say, I'm from the UK, West Yorkshire. It's in the northern part of the UK, England. And he sort of leant in a little bit and said, "No, where are you really from?" And my immediate reaction was to say, "Oh, it's a small town called Huddersfield in West Yorkshire, northern part of the UK." And then he looked around at the other people that were stood there, my peers, my colleagues that had come from the UK. And in that moment, I started to realize what he was really asking me. But before I could do anything, say anything, he asked me again. And he said, "No, what I mean is, where is your family from?" And again, in that moment, in the same way that I felt like I didn't belong when I was doing the presentation, I felt like I didn't really belong in that space. I felt like this wasn't for me. Anyway, time passed on. I went and started working at another agency. I was the only designer there, but this agency and the environment in the agency was really toxic. I remember designing things, sketching things, putting analysis and notes and research up on whiteboards and things like that. And the owner of the agency would come by and tear things down and have a go at me for saying, "Well, that isn't what I had in my head, and you've not designed this very well. You're not very good at your job." And I remember while I was there, I kept saying to myself, I can't give up. I need to keep going. I need to keep learning. And this is a test for me. But gradually I started to ask myself whether I was even cut out for this design space, this tech space. I start to wonder whether I had it in me to succeed in a space where I just struggled to kind of explain myself and speak confidently and stand for those things that I believed in. Anyway, I stayed at this agency for 7 months. I left from this agency. And at this point, I was genuinely considering a career change. I thought to myself, I'm not good enough for design. I may have some good ideas, but actually when it comes to talking through my ideas and having conversations with people and explaining things, I just struggle with that. It's just not me. And I thought to myself, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe going into design was the wrong thing for me, and I needed a real career change. Maybe I needed to do something completely different where I wouldn't need to rely on the lack of speaking skills or confidence or whatever it was that I didn't have. And I remember one day I was online and I was looking around at a few websites, and on one website they described kind of like an award ceremony for websites and digital experiences. And one of the websites that was being nominated was a site that I'd designed at my previous role at this agency, which was very toxic. And I remember kind of like laughing to myself. I remember thinking to myself, I designed that website, but surely it can't be that website which is being nominated for an award. Surely after I left, someone else came and did a much better job of it. And I clicked through and went on to look at the nominees, clicked through to the website, and it was in reality, the website I designed. And this was a real turning moment for me. This was a point in my career, in my life, where it was almost like time stood still and I started to see things differently. I remember thinking to myself, I doubted myself at that agency, but even through that tough, toxic environment, I'd somehow crafted something that'd been nominated for an award. It didn't matter what award it was, didn't matter whether this website won the award. It was the fact that my contribution had led to that. And it was at this point that I started to see a pattern of disconnect between my perceived performance and my accomplishment. I remember thinking back to the days of university where I would tell myself that I'd been lucky to get a certain mark, or maybe the presentation didn't go well, but the examiner stood up for me, therefore I got a good mark in my degree. But actually, I was achieving good things. I was achieving the things that I was setting out to achieve. And I started to really obsess with this. I thought to myself, I need to explore this. I need to understand this because this doesn't make sense. I'm achieving things that I feel I should be proud of. And yet I'm about to walk away from this space where I clearly have achieved things. And up until now, I feel like I haven't even recognized that. So I started to explore this space a little bit more. And I came across this theory, attribution theory. And this applies to everyone. It applies to you. It applies to me. As humans, we attribute everything we do, every success, every failure to both internal, external factors. So if you imagine, you get yourself a promotion at work, you might attribute that to something internal by saying it was my sheer ability that got me to this stage that I've now been promoted. Or it may be that you externalize the attribution of your success by saying, I think it was because everybody liked me, or maybe someone put in a good word for me. Or maybe it was I got lucky. Perhaps an opportunity came up and I was just in the right space at the right time. And it's actually quite normal for us to externalize our success and to really internalize our failures. And this is exactly what I was doing. I wasn't giving myself credit for the things that I was achieving. I wasn't giving myself credit for the things that I was accomplishing. And this was something that really spoke to me when I looked at this theory, and I felt I needed to go deeper, further, to understand this far more. It was at this point that I came across the phenomenon known as imposter syndrome. I came across the work of Pauline Clance and Susan Eames from the 1970s, where they'd spent a lot of time exploring how people felt after achieving things and achieving success and so on. And they started to describe this phenomenon that they'd seen amongst people as imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome being that pattern in which people struggle to accept their achievements. And often in the same way that I was feeling, whether it was during a presentation, working at an agency, being abroad somewhere, doing an exchange of ideas, everything, whether it was the color of my skin, whether it was the way that I couldn't explain my ideas, everything brought me back to this point that perhaps I'm going to get found out. Maybe I have been found out, and this simply isn't the space for me. What I found really interesting about this research is this particular quote, that imposter syndrome in the research that was done was really intense among a select sample of high achieving women. Clearly at the time, we had major issues with our society, hence why women who were high achieving were feeling this way. And those issues continue to this day. They affect more than women. But what I found fascinating was that people that were achieving great things were feeling like this. And I saw a parallel there with myself. I saw a parallel in the sense that perhaps I wasn't achieving very highly, but I was achieving what I set out to achieve. I was achieving my goals. And for me, that was something that I should have felt proud of. And in reality, I wasn't feeling proud of it. In reality, I was very much at that point, at that cusp of actually walking away from the design and tech space. So I'd like to briefly talk about what can trigger imposter syndrome. You probably can imagine negative experience being a major part of it, because that's what I've described to you. I've given you lots of examples of negative experiences triggering imposter syndrome. But there are other reasons why imposter syndrome can be triggered in a person. Perhaps the significant change that happens in your life. Perhaps there's a breakdown of a relationship. Perhaps there's a major change in your place of work. Perhaps you change jobs. It can also be down to life pressures. You know, we put pressure on ourselves to find success and to be who we want to be. And we aspire to people around us, and that can create a lot of pressure. And when we feel like we're not achieving our goals, it can feel like, you know what, we're just not going to make it, and we're kind of stumbling through to our achievements. Therefore, one day someone's going to find out that we're not really who we're supposed to be and who we say we are. And the final point, which I think is actually probably the most critical when it comes to triggers, is the lack of transparency. We live in a world where often we see someone achieve success, and all we see is them at the point of success. Rarely do we find out how they reached that point of success. What did their journey look like? How did they get to that point of achieving that success? What challenges did they face? What problems did they have to overcome? You know, what internal demons did they have to overcome? And that lack of transparency, not just in the design space, but in society as a whole, can be a major factor in triggering imposter syndrome in people. What I'd also like to talk about is ways in which you can identify whether you're suffering from imposter syndrome. And I say a lot of this from personal experience. So this isn't a list that covers everything. Other people that have experienced imposter syndrome may have other ways of identifying the fact that they've experienced imposter syndrome. Some of the key things that I found in my experience, the first was downplaying your expertise. I would often do this. People would tell me that I'm good at this, and I would downplay my expertise. I'd say, no, I'm not. I'm not actually good at that. You know, I know many people that are far better than me. I would often focus on small mistakes. You know, it's human nature to focus on small mistakes, isn't it? You know, if 9 people give you a compliment based on how you look, and one person, you know, calls out a blemish, whether it's the way you've dressed, maybe it's the makeup that you've done, maybe it's your hair, maybe it's something else. We focus on the negative, don't we? We forget the 9 people that told us how amazing we looked, and we focus on the negative. It's also related to feedback as well. This is something that I really feared. You know, I really kind of feared the idea of being stood in front of people and people giving me feedback and not giving me great feedback. You know, telling me that the work that I'd done wasn't great and it didn't hit the right notes. That is what I experienced when I did presentations. That's what I experienced when I did my final year walkthrough of my thesis. And then what I touched on earlier, you know, if you're attributing your success to external factors, if you're saying, you know what, I found success, but actually it was just because I worked really hard. It's not because I'm naturally gifted. It's not because I have the natural ability, the creative skill. You know, it's just because I worked hard or I got lucky. And if you're doing any of these, then chances are you're experiencing imposter syndrome. So can imposter syndrome affect anyone? Yeah, absolutely. It can. And research shows that 7 out of 10 people will experience it at some point in their lives. That's a lot of people that are living with imposter syndrome, experiencing it. And it's a topic that I feel I need to talk about because I've experienced it And by talking about it, by sharing that transparency, I'm hoping it helps others. I'm hoping it gives people the platform to reach out and open up and actually talk about their own experiences. And there's lots of people that already do that. There's lots of people that do that. And I think we can all look to them and feel inspired by their honesty. Natalie Portman, a well-known actress, amazing at her craft. When she went into Harvard, this is a quote from her, she felt like there'd been some kind of mistake. This was how she felt. And she absolutely deserved to be in Harvard because of her intellect. And yet here she was, feeling like there'd been a mistake, like she didn't belong, like she was an imposter. John Steinbeck, well-known author, renowned for his works, renowned for his writing. This is a quote from him. I am not a writer. I've been fooling myself and other people. He admired his characters for being so much stronger and purer and braver than he was. And often in kind of anything that he would describe about his work or his approach, he would say that actually, I'm just lucky in the way that I write things. I'm actually not good at this and I struggle through it, and I'm not actually good at writing stories or good at writing characters. And yet people around him would tell him otherwise. And Doug Collins, a UX designer, maybe you know Doug from Twitter. He has thousands and thousands of followers. He tweets some great stuff. So if you don't follow him, strongly recommend that you follow him, because he's a very honest, open designer. And here he is describing the fact that he's having a full day of anxiety and imposter syndrome. And he's a designer with lots of experience. He's well known. He does a lot of talks. He does live streams. He's got great experience, great skills, great knowledge. He mentors. People look up to him. And here he is experiencing imposter syndrome. And this transparency is really important because we need more of this in the design and the tech space. So how can you overcome imposter syndrome? I can only share with you my experience of dealing with imposter syndrome. There are many ways to deal with imposter syndrome and to try to overcome it. And this is my take on it. And I hope everyone finds the next few minutes quite useful in how I try and explain my experience involved dealing with imposter syndrome. So the first thing that I would recommend is finding yourself a mentor. Imposter syndrome grows, and similar to depression, it takes over you if it's just yourself and your own thoughts that you live with. If you have a mentor, someone you can talk to, someone who can give you a wider perspective on your journey, on your experiences, that can make a big difference to how you see things. Sometimes, as I said, you end up focusing on the negative, and having a mentor can pull you away from the negative and perhaps the small wins, the small signs that you do belong in this space and you're not actually an imposter. You're working hard and you're achieving great things. So it's really important to find a mentor. I have a mentor. The people I work with, the teams that I manage and lead, everybody from my perspective gets recommended to go and find themselves a mentor. One thing that we often do is, we end up focusing on how we're performing. We don't focus on what we're learning. In anything that we do, we're constantly learning. Sometimes we don't even realize it. And the best example I can give in trying to understand this point in the sense that you overcome imposter syndrome, is to think of how you learn to drive a car. The first time you learn to drive a car, or the first time you learn to ride a bicycle or ride a motorbike, your first few attempts are not great. I mean, I remember learning to drive a car and I kept stalling the car and struggling. And, it's just the way it is because it's the first time you're doing something. And yet I don't remember coming away from that experience thinking, you know what, I just performed really, really bad. And today that's it. I could never come back to this. You focus on the learning, you do 2 or 3 attempts where you start to get to grips with how you drive a car, and you focus on the learning. You don't focus on the performance. You keep focusing on what you're learning each time you attempt to drive the car or ride the bicycle. And you keep doing that until you become more confident. And that's a key thing to do in overcoming imposter syndrome. Whether you're a designer, whether you're a content writer, an engineer, product owner, product manager, analyst, whatever role you do, whether it's in tech, design, whether it's outside of that space, it's important that we focus on learning, not the performance. The performance will change over time. As long as we focus on the learning, if each day you're learning something small, that means you're taking steps towards becoming better at what you do. It's also really important to keep an accomplishment journal. Like I said, it's very easy to focus on the negative. Someone gives you great feedback, you remember it in the moment. A fortnight later, when you're not having such a great day and you're feeling really anxious, it's easy to forget that wonderful comment or that compliment that somebody gave you. So what I do is I keep an accomplishment journal, and it includes everything, the big wins, the small wins. If I do something positive for one of my colleagues, one of my peers, if I'm mentoring someone and I help them overcome a hurdle, to me, that's something I've accomplished. That's a sign that I belong in this space and I've earned my right to be here. And by referring back to it regularly, I can keep pulling myself away from any negative thoughts that I have, any kind of negative concepts that build up in my mind about myself and the fact that I might be an imposter or I might get found out or anything like that. Another critical step in overcoming imposter syndrome is to stop comparing. We live in a society where it's easy to compare. You can go and look at someone that you admire on Instagram and see them stood next to a Ferrari, and you've no idea whether that Ferrari is theirs, how they got that Ferrari, whether they just stood there taking a picture. Maybe they had to really struggle. Maybe they spent 10, 15 years working really hard to achieve their goals, to get to that point where they own a Ferrari. And when we see things like that, as I said earlier, we don't really see that journey. We just get a snapshot of a moment, and it's really important that we don't try and compare ourselves to others. It's really important that we try and see our own journey as unique. We try and see the steps that we're going through and the things that we're accomplishing and the challenges that we're facing into as quite unique to us. And we don't try and compare to other people. It's good to get inspired by others, but even people that we're trying to aspire towards and aspire to be more like, it's important that we understand that they have their journey and we have ours. And if you focus on your own journey, that comparison can come to an end. And without comparison, you can start to limit that impact of imposter syndrome. A critical part of overcoming imposter syndrome in my experience is to sometimes stop doing things. We live in a super busy society. We have devices everywhere. We have phones, we have things pinging us, asking for attention. We have a home life. We have a home life that blurs with the work life because actually, we're living in a completely different world post COVID-19. And rarely do we have that time to really press pause on our life and really kind of soak up and understand the experiences that we're having. And it's really important that we take that time to reflect, because actually understanding our experiences, both the good and the bad, processing them, making meaning of them, understanding our feelings, our bias, anything we took into the situation, anything we take out of the situation, it can really help develop our understanding of a given experience or situation. It can really change our perspective on things when we try and understand things more. And I always try and think of thoughts as leaves falling on the ground. If we keep rushing around, we never give that opportunity to our thoughts to gradually fall into place wherever they're supposed to fall into, to allow us to really understand and assess everything that we've experienced in a given day or a given week. And it's really, really important that we take that time to reflect and understand things. And in my experience, that's been, for me at least, that's been really key in overcoming imposter syndrome, to say to myself that every day I'm going to make time where there's no phone, there's no device, there's no TV, there's nothing, there's nobody. It's just me in a room where I have 10, 15 minutes, reflect on the day, understand things. Maybe there's things that I can learn from that I can try and do better. Maybe there was a situation I could have handled in a different way. But actually, rather than just picking that situation up at face value and thinking, I'm not good enough and I didn't do a great job and I failed and someone will find out that I'm not good enough at being a manager. To actually take the time to understand and process that experience, to dissect it and take out the things that you can take out of it to learn from, and to say, you know what, tomorrow I can course correct this. I can make things better because tomorrow I will remember to do this differently. For me, that has come heavily from having 10 to 15 minutes a day to reflect, and to just let my thoughts settle based on the experiences that I'm having. So we're coming to the end of this talk, and I guess the question that I want to bring it back to is, can you really overcome imposter syndrome? I've shared a lot of my personal experience of imposter syndrome, the things that I've tried to overcome it, how I almost went down a black hole of thinking I need to walk away from the design space. I started to understand imposter syndrome, and then I've shared some techniques with you on what has worked for me to try and overcome imposter syndrome. I guess the question is, can you really overcome it? Have I completely overcome imposter syndrome? The reality is that imposter syndrome is a constant battle. There is no real overcoming it, certainly not in my experience, but there is a way to keep it at bay. There is a way to make sure you're in control of it and it doesn't control you. Again, similar to depression, what you have to make sure of is that imposter syndrome doesn't completely take over you and doesn't start dictating the things that you do and the decisions that you take in your life. And I often compare it to a boxing match. You know, imposter syndrome is there to live with you. It's there to live with me every day, every week, at home, at work. And round after round of spending that time with imposter syndrome, I just need to keep it at bay. Perhaps it's by looking at my accomplishment journal. Perhaps it's by taking time to reflect. Maybe it's choosing not to compare myself to a person that I aspire towards. But these different techniques can help keep imposter syndrome at bay. These techniques that I've described can really help limit the effect of imposter syndrome. And it really goes back to that point of staying in control of what imposter syndrome does to you. Acknowledging that it exists, acknowledging that it's there, and being really self-aware to it is a really, really key step in this constant battle against imposter syndrome. The other reality that I've found and learned over the years is that we're all imposters. Doesn't matter whether we're talking about being a designer, an engineer, product manager, analyst, whatever job you do, whether you're a doctor, physician, whether you work in retail, whether we're talking about being an adult, a parent, a carer, we're all imposters because nobody gets a manual on how to be any of those things. I'm a parent to a 6-year-old boy, and nobody gave me a manual on how to be a parent, how to be a good dad. You have to figure that out yourself. And that means we're imposters in almost everything that we do in life, whether it's a job, whether it's a relationship, it doesn't really matter. And I think there's comfort to take from that, because actually everybody is facing the same sort of challenge. We're all figuring this out as we go along. We're all trying to find our way. We're all trying to navigate through the challenges that we face in life, in work. And actually, nobody really has all of the answers. What I've learned is that the most important thing to do is just to show up. And I'll lean heavily on this quote by Brené Brown. If you're aware of Brené Brown, if you've read any of her books or heard or watched any of her talks, you'll know how amazing she is and how thought-provoking her ideas and the things that she shares can be. And this quote to me is something that I've held really, really dear to my heart over the years. Sometimes the bravest and most important thing you can do is just show up. When I think back to that experience at university where I really struggled with presentations, and especially that presentation that I gave in regards to my thesis, even though I was physically there, I wasn't mentally showing up. I didn't want to. And I was running from it. And I kept running from it. You know, this thing that I didn't like, public speaking. You've probably gathered by now that I haven't walked away from the design space. You've probably gathered that I kept showing up. And that's the reason why I'm sat here today, because I refused to give in. I kept showing up and I kept saying, well, if I don't enjoy doing presentations, if I don't enjoy public speaking, I need to change that. And I can't change that, just overnight. I changed that by just constantly turning up and being there and being present and taking every opportunity that the universe throws at me to speak publicly or do presentations or explain my ideas or perhaps rationalize my work. And by showing up, when you keep showing up, you start to learn, you start to build up that confidence, you start to build up that belief that, you know what, I can actually do this. And the trick is to keep showing up, because it's like practice makes perfect, doesn't it? The more you do something, the more you keep throwing yourself in there saying, you know what, I kind of don't care if I get it all wrong. I kind of don't care if it all feels horrible. I'm going to keep doing it anyway, because this is the only way I'm going to overcome it. That's actually the best advice that I can give you, to keep showing up. So whatever it is that makes you feel like an imposter, whether it's presenting, whether it's something else, whether it's something personal in your life, in your work, the best advice I can give you is to keep showing up. If you keep showing up, you can build up that confidence, and that confidence in that constant battle with imposter syndrome will always win. And that's my experience of imposter syndrome. I really hope everybody finds what I've shared today useful. Perhaps it strikes a chord with you, and you've experienced something similar. When I've done this talk in the past, people have said that they've had similar experiences, and I think it's really important that we're transparent about these things. I'm sat here doing a talk, and I didn't get here overnight. I didn't go from being that person that was shaking and losing the feeling in his legs, stood in front of 4 or 5 people, to being a person that does public speaking in person and virtually. That didn't happen overnight. That took work, and that took effort to just keep showing up. So that's the end of the talk. Thank you very much. I hope everybody has found that useful today, and hopefully you can take something away from what I've shared today. So I believe the stream is coming to an end now. So I just wanted to just finally say thanks to everyone that's joined and listened. You can reach me on various forums like Twitter and LinkedIn and get in touch with me if there's anything that you'd like to ask me. I'm more than happy to speak to anybody. But I really hope everyone found that useful. For those that joined the session, I really appreciate you joining and taking the time to patiently listen to my journey. It's a very personal topic for me, a really personal journey that I've shared. And I really do hope people take something away from it. And hopefully it strikes a chord with you, and hopefully it helps you if you've experienced imposter syndrome or are experiencing anything similar to that. So thank you very much for joining the stream. Thank you very much for joining the session. I really appreciate everyone that came along. Thank you, and goodbye for now.